She thought she could humiliate me in front of the entire family, strip me of my dignity, and crush my deepest hope. But at that Christmas table, when I reached into my purse and laid down those ultrasound photos, her smirk vanished. The woman who'd spent 3 years telling me I'd never be a mother sat there, mouth agape, as her power crumbled like dried holly. And that was just the beginning of watching her world collapse around her. My name is Rachel Monroe, and I'm 36 years old. I work as a senior loan officer at Summit Credit Bank in downtown Cleveland, where I've built a respectable career over the past decade. But none of that mattered when I pulled into the snow-covered driveway of my in-laws' colonial house in Royal Oak, Michigan, that Christmas Eve. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white, and I could feel David shifting nervously in the passenger seat beside me. "Maybe this year will be different," he said, though his voice lacked any real conviction. We both knew better. 3 years of marriage had taught me that nothing ever changed at the Monroe family Christmas dinner, especially not Elaine Monroe's opinion of me. The house glowed with warm lights, each window framed with perfect garland, as if staged for a Hallmark movie. From the outside, it looked inviting, magical even. But I knew what waited inside, the subtle glances, the whispered conversations that would stop the moment I entered a room. And most of all, Elaine's razor-sharp tongue disguised behind a hostess's smile. As we walked up the salted pathway, carrying wrapped presents and a homemade apple pie I'd spent hours perfecting, I could already hear the laughter from inside. David's sister Margaret was there with her 3 kids, his brother Tom with his pregnant wife Jennifer. The fertile ones, as I'd come to think of them bitterly. The ones who'd given Elaine what she wanted most, grandchildren. David opened the door without knocking, and immediately the familiar scent of cinnamon and pine hit me. "We're here," he called out, his voice taking on that false cheerfulness he always adopted around his mother. Elaine appeared in the foyer within seconds, as if she'd been waiting. She was wearing a crimson dress that matched her lipstick perfectly, her silver hair styled in an elegant bob. At 62, she was still a striking woman who commanded attention the moment she entered any room. "David, darling." She embraced her son warmly, then turned to me. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Rachel, how nice of you to come." The emphasis on nice was subtle but unmistakable. Everything with Elaine was subtle but unmistakable. She took the pie from my hands, examining it with a critical eye. "Store-bought crust?" she asked, though we both knew I'd made it from scratch. "Everything's homemade." "Elaine," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Of course it is, dear." She turned away, calling over her shoulder. "Everyone's in the living room. We were just discussing Tom and Jennifer's nursery plans. Such an exciting time for them." David squeezed my hand as we followed her, but I pulled away. I was tired of his silent solidarity that never translated into actual support when it mattered. The living room was exactly as I'd expected, a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Tom was demonstrating something on his phone while Jennifer sat glowing on the couch, her hand resting on her prominent belly. Margaret's children were playing by the tree, the youngest trying to shake a present. David's father, Robert, sat in his leather armchair, bourbon in hand, watching everything with the detached amusement of a man who'd learned long ago not to interfere in his wife's domain. "Rachel." Jennifer waved me over with genuine warmth. She was one of the few allies I had in this family. "You look beautiful. I love that dress." Before I could respond, Elaine's voice cut through the room. "Yes, Rachel always dresses so professionally, even for family gatherings." The implication was clear. I was an outsider trying too hard to fit in. The next hour was a masterclass in subtle torture. Every conversation somehow circled back to children, pregnancy, or family legacy. Margaret shared stories about her kids' Christmas pageant. Tom discussed his plans to add another room to their house for baby number 2. And through it all, Elaine's eyes would find me, a small smile playing at her lips as if to say, "See what you're missing. See what you can't provide." When dinner was finally announced, I thought I might get a reprieve. The dining room was magnificent, the table set with Elaine's grandmother's china and crystal that caught the light from the chandelier. I took my assigned seat, always the same one, notably distant from David and positioned where Elaine could watch me throughout the meal. The food was perfect, of course. Elaine was many things, but she was an exceptional cook. The turkey was golden and moist, the sides abundant and expertly seasoned. Robert said grace, and for a moment, just a moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe we could get through one holiday dinner without incident. Then Elaine stood, raising her glass of wine. Before we begin, I'd like to make a toast. Everyone lifted their glasses, smiling. To family, she began, her eyes scanning the table. To the blessings we have and the ones yet to come. To Tom and Jennifer's growing family, to Margaret's beautiful children, and to... She paused, her gaze landing on me with surgical precision. To accepting God's plan for us, whatever that may be. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what she meant. David's hand found mine under the table, but I remained still, my face a mask of calm while inside, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the moment she'd been building to all evening. But Elaine wasn't done. The wine had loosened her tongue. Or perhaps she'd simply decided that 3 years of subtle cruelty wasn't enough anymore. She needed the kill shot. You know, she continued, still standing, still holding her glass. This family has been blessed with such fertility. My mother had 4 children. I had 3. Margaret has 3. And now Tom and Jennifer. It's such a strong genetic legacy. Her eyes never left mine. It would be such a shame if it ended because of inadequacy. The inadequacy comment hung in the air like a physical presence. I could feel everyone's discomfort, but no one spoke up. They never did. That night, as David drove us back to our hotel in silence, I stared out at the dark Michigan highways and let my mind drift back to where this all began. 3 years. That's how long David and I had been trying to have a baby. It started with excitement and hope, throwing away my birth control pills with a celebratory glass of champagne, making love with purpose and passion, imagining nursery colors and baby names. The first few months of negative pregnancy tests were disappointing but not alarming. It takes time, everyone said. Just relax. But relaxing became impossible as months turned into a year. I started tracking everything, my temperature, ovulation windows, cervical mucus. Sorry if that's too much information. But infertility strips away all modesty. Our bedroom became a laboratory, our intimacy scheduled and mechanical. David would joke about performance reviews, but I could see the strain in his eyes. The first visit to Ohio Reproductive Medicine happened on a rainy Tuesday in March. Dr. Patel was kind but clinical as she ordered test after test. Blood work that left my arms bruised. Ultrasounds that showed my empty womb in grayscale mockery. The HSG test where they shot dye through my fallopian tubes. I nearly passed out from the pain. David held my hand through it all, but I could feel him pulling away emotionally, retreating into his work at the architectural firm. Your eggs are aging faster than normal. Dr. Patel explained 6 months into treatment. Your AMH levels are concerning for someone your age. We should consider IVF sooner rather than later. IVF. In vitro fertilization. $25,000 for a chance, not a guarantee. Just a chance. At motherhood. We drained our savings. Took out a loan against my 401k. The hormone injections started that fall. Every morning at 6:30 I'd prep the needles in our bathroom, the gonal F and menopur that would supposedly coax my stubborn ovaries into producing multiple eggs. David offered to do the injections, but I needed to maintain some control over something. The hormones turned me into someone I didn't recognize. I'd cry at commercial jingles, rage at traffic lights, feel my body swelling and aching in ways I'd never experienced. My colleagues at the bank started tiptoeing around me. My supervisor, Janet, pulled me aside one day after I'd snapped at a junior loan officer. "Rachel, is everything okay? You haven't seemed like yourself lately." I wanted to tell her everything, about the bruises hidden under my blouse, the 4 follicles growing on my ovaries that weren't enough but might have to be, the way David had started sleeping on the couch because my night sweat soaked through the sheets. Instead, I smiled and blamed it on stress from the Morrison account. Egg retrieval day came in November. They put me under general anesthesia and extracted 7 eggs, 7 chances. By the time the embryologist called 3 days later, only 2 had fertilized properly. 2 embryos from all that pain and money and hope. "We'll transfer both," Dr. Patel recommended. "It increases your chances." The transfer was surreal, watching on the ultrasound screen as they placed those 2 tiny clusters of cells into my uterus. David squeezed my hand and whispered, "This is it, baby. This is going to work." For the first time in months, I saw the man I'd married, the one who used to talk about teaching our kids to play baseball in the backyard. The 2-week wait nearly broke me. Every twinge, every moment of nausea, every slight tenderness in my breasts became a sign. I tested early, 8 days past transfer, and saw the faintest second line. My hands shook as I showed David. "It's positive," I whispered. "It's faint, but it's positive." We didn't celebrate. We'd learned not to celebrate too early, but for 4 beautiful days. I was pregnant. I calculated the due date, imagined telling our families at Christmas, finally giving Elaine the grandchild from David she so desperately wanted. Then the bleeding started. Light at first, just spotting really. Dr. Patel ordered blood work. My HCG levels were falling. Chemical pregnancy, she called it. A cruel term for a cruel joke. Pregnant enough for a positive test. Not pregnant enough for a baby. David shut down completely after that. He threw himself into designing a new office complex in Akron, working until 10 or 11 p.m. every night. When I suggested trying again, he'd say, "Let's just take a break. Rach, we need to recover financially." But I knew it wasn't about money. It was about Elaine. Every Sunday phone call with his mother chipped away at his resolve. She never said anything directly to him. She was too smart for that. Instead, she'd mention how Tom and Jennifer conceived so easily, how Margaret was thinking about a 4th child, how the Monroe genes were so strong in everyone else. "Maybe it's not meant to be," David said one night after a particularly long call with her. We were lying in bed, not touching, an ocean of cold sheets between us. "Maybe we should consider other options." "Like what adoption?" I asked. "Or just accepting it, being child-free. Lots of couples are choosing that now." But I heard what he really meant, what Elaine had programmed him to think, that I was the problem, that his strong Monroe genes were being wasted on my defective body. The worst part was the isolation. Friends with kids gradually stopped inviting us to things. "We figured you wouldn't want to be around all the children," they'd say, not realizing that excluding us hurt worse than watching their happiness. My sister in Portland called less frequently, guilty about her own 2 healthy pregnancies. Even my mother had stopped asking when we'd give her grandchildren, which somehow felt worse than the asking. So I learned to hide it. At work, I became the consummate professional, earning a promotion to senior loan officer. At family gatherings, I perfected the art of deflection. When acquaintances asked about kids, I had a repertoire of responses. "We're focusing on our careers right now," or "when the time is right," or simply, "We'll see what happens." But Elaine saw through it all. She smelled blood in the water, and like any predator, she circled closer with each passing month. The comments became sharper, more direct. "The clock is ticking, Rachel. David would make such a wonderful father, don't you think? Have you considered that maybe you're trying too hard? I've heard stress can prevent conception." What Elaine didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I hadn't given up. After that failed IVF cycle, while David retreated into his work and his family assumed we'd accepted our fate, I'd secretly started preparing for another attempt. I switched to a new clinic, Cleveland Fertility Associates, where Dr. Martinez had a different approach. I paid for the consultations in cash, scheduled appointments during my lunch breaks, hid the medication in a locked drawer at my office. The second IVF cycle started in early November, just 6 weeks before this Christmas dinner. I told David I was working on a major loan restructuring that required extra hours. He didn't question it. He'd stopped questioning anything about my schedule months ago. Every morning at 5:45 a.m., before he woke up, I'd drive to the clinic for monitoring, blood draws, ultrasounds, adjusting medication doses. This time, my body responded better. 15 follicles, 12 eggs retrieved, 8 fertilized. On December 3rd, a date I'll never forget, Dr. Martinez called with the news that 5 embryos had made it today, 5 blastocysts. 5. We decided to transfer just one, the highest graded embryo, a perfect-looking cluster of cells that the embryologist said was textbook beautiful. The transfer happened on December 7th. I took a sick day, told David I had a stomach bug. I drove myself to the clinic, lay on that familiar table, and watched alone as they placed my maybe baby into my womb. The nurse held my hand since David wasn't there. "You're very brave, doing this alone," she said. I wasn't brave. I was desperate. This time, I didn't test early. I couldn't bear another chemical pregnancy, another faint line that would disappear like a ghost. I waited the full 2 weeks. On December 21st, 3 days before this Christmas dinner, I sat in the clinic's bathroom stall, pants around my ankles, holding the blood work requisition form. The phlebotomist had been cheerful, wishing me luck as she filled 3 vials with my blood. 4 hours later, my phone rang while I was reviewing loan documents. Dr. Martinez's voice was warm, excited even. "Rachel, your HCG is 342. You're definitely pregnant. Congratulations." I couldn't speak. I sat in my office, door closed, hand over my mouth, sobbing silently. Pregnant. Actually, truly, medically confirmed pregnant. The number was strong, doubling appropriately when I went back 2 days later. 598, then 2,412. Each rise meant the pregnancy was progressing normally. Dr. Martinez scheduled an ultrasound for December 23rd. I told David I was going last-minute Christmas shopping. Instead, I lay on another exam table, this time with my heart hammering as the technician moved the wand over my belly, and there it was, a tiny flicker on the screen. A heartbeat. 142 beats per minute. My baby's heart, beating inside me. "Would you like pictures?" the technician asked. "Yes," I whispered. "Please." She printed out 4 images, those grainy black and white photos that looked like weather radar to anyone else but were everything to me. I sat in my car in the parking garage afterward, staring at them, tracing the tiny bean-shaped form with my finger, 6 weeks and 4 days along. Due date August 15th. I'd planned to tell David on Christmas morning. I'd bought a tiny pair of baby booties, wrapped them in a box with the ultrasound photos. It was going to be our Christmas miracle, our new beginning. I imagined his face, the joy, the relief, the love flooding back into his eyes. We'd call our families together, share the news, finally be part of the pregnancy club that had excluded us for so long. But as I sat in that parking garage, something shifted in me. I thought about all the times David had failed to defend me against his mother. Every cruel comment he'd let slide, every family dinner where he'd sat silent while she dissected my inadequacies. I thought about his suggestion that we just accept being childless, how quickly he'd given up on us, on me. And I thought about Elaine, how she'd made my infertility her personal victory, how she'd weaponized my pain against me, used it to prove I wasn't worthy of her precious son, how she'd probably already been planting seeds in David's mind about divorce, about finding someone younger, more fertile, more worthy of the Monroe legacy. That's when I decided I wouldn't tell them on Christmas morning. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of happy tears and group hugs and Elaine taking credit for praying for this miracle. No. If Elaine wanted to make my infertility the centerpiece of Christmas dinner, then I'd let her. I'd let her build her case, make her pronouncements, establish her cruel narrative in front of everyone. And then I'd destroy it all with 4 little pieces of paper. I went to Target that afternoon and bought a small purse organizer, the kind with a zipper pocket. I placed the ultrasound photos inside, careful not to crease them. They stayed in my regular purse, transferred to my clutch for the Christmas dinner. Throughout the entire evening, the arrival, the cocktails, the subtle jabs and not-so-subtle insults, those photos were right there, inches from my hand, my secret weapon, my proof that Elaine was wrong, had always been wrong. The power of that secret was intoxicating. Every condescending look from Elaine, every pitying glance from the family, every moment of David's cowardly silence, I endured it all knowing that I held the trump card. I wasn't broken. I wasn't inadequate. I was growing life inside me at that very moment, while Elaine pontificated about my failures. I'd already decided that tonight would change everything. Not just revealing the pregnancy, but revealing who Elaine really was, stripping away the veneer of the concerned mother-in-law to expose the cruel, manipulative woman underneath. She thought she could break me with her words, crush my spirit with her implications and innuendos. She had no idea that she was about to hand me the perfect opportunity to break her instead. The ultrasound photos seemed to pulse in my purse, like a telltale heart. 6 weeks and 5 days now. My baby was the size of a sweet pea, developing arms and legs, a nose, ears. Brainwaves had started. While Elaine served her perfect turkey and poured her expensive wine, my child was growing, thriving, proving her wrong with every dividing cell. The dinner continued its torturous course after Elaine's inadequacy toast. The silence that followed was deafening until Robert cleared his throat and mumbled something about the turkey being perfect. Everyone gratefully latched onto the distraction, complimenting the food with excessive enthusiasm, but I could feel the weight of unspoken pity directed at me. Elaine, emboldened by the lack of pushback, seemed to grow taller in her chair. She carved into her meat with precise, deliberate cuts, the queen of her domain, savoring her power. David hadn't touched my hand again since her toast. He was pushing green beans around his plate like a child, avoiding everyone's eyes, especially mine. So, Rachel, Elaine began again, her voice honey-sweet poison. I heard Summit Credit Bank is doing well. You must be putting in long hours. That's wonderful that you have your career to focus on. The implication was clear. Since you can't have children, at least you have work. Yes, the bank is doing very well, I replied evenly, cutting my turkey into perfectly sized pieces I had no intention of eating. It's so important for women to have purpose, she continued, glancing meaningfully at Jennifer's belly. Whether that's raising the next generation or other pursuits. Margaret shifted uncomfortably. Even she, who usually stayed neutral, seemed to sense that her mother was crossing lines tonight. Mom, maybe we should— Oh, I'm just making conversation. Dear, Elaine interrupted. Rachel understands, don't you? We're all family here. We can speak freely. Of course, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Please, speak freely. Elaine smiled, mistaking my calm for submission. I was just telling my book club the other day about David's childhood. He was such a natural with younger children, always helping with the neighbors' babies, volunteering at the church nursery. Do you remember, David, how you used to say you wanted 6 kids? David's fork clattered against his plate. Mom, please. What? It's a sweet memory. You'd line up all your stuffed animals and pretend they were your children. You'd even check on them at night, make sure they were sleeping properly. She laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. You were born to be a father. The words hung there, born to be a father. Unlike me, who was apparently born to be barren. Tom tried to change the subject. Hey, did anyone catch the Lions game last week? But Elaine wasn't finished. The wine had loosened her usual restraint. Or perhaps she'd simply decided that 3 years of subtle warfare wasn't satisfying enough anymore. You know, Rachel, she said, refilling her wine glass. Have you considered that perhaps this is God's way of telling you something? Sometimes He has different plans for us. Not everyone is meant to be a mother. It's not a failure. It's just acceptance. Jennifer gasped audibly. Robert set down his bourbon with a sharp click. Even Tom stopped mid-chew. But David said nothing. He sat there, staring at his plate, letting his mother eviscerate me word by word. I mean, Elaine continued, look at history. There have been many notable women who never had children. They contributed in other ways. You could volunteer with children, perhaps. Be an aunt figure to Margaret's kids or Tom's baby. That might fulfill whatever maternal instincts you have. Mother, Margaret said sharply. That's enough. I'm trying to help, Elaine protested, her eyes wide with false innocence. It's been 3 years. At some point, we need to acknowledge reality. False hope is cruel. Don't you think it's crueler to keep pretending? She turned back to me, and I saw it then, the gleam of victory in her eyes. She thought she had won. She thought she was delivering the killing blow. David and I have talked about this extensively, she said, and I saw David's head snap up, his face draining of color. He's mentioned that the constant trying, the treatments, the disappointment, it's affecting your marriage. Perhaps if you accepted your situation, you could both move forward, separately, if necessary. The room exploded. Margaret stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. Mother, how dare you? Tom was saying something to David, who looked like he'd been punched. Jennifer had her hand over her mouth. Robert had actually stood up, something I'd never seen him do during one of Elaine's performances. Elaine, he said, his voice carrying a warning that spoke of 50 years of marriage. You've gone too far. But I remained seated, calm, my hands folded in my lap. I was watching Elaine, memorizing this moment, her flushed cheeks, the triumphant tilt of her chin, the way she clutched her wine glass like a scepter. This was her at her most powerful, her most cruel. She'd finally said what she'd been thinking for 3 years, that I should give up, that I should release her son from the burden of my barren womb. Are you finished? I asked quietly. The room fell silent again. All eyes turned to me. Elaine seemed surprised that I was speaking. I'm simply being honest, dear. Someone needs to be honest, I repeated, tasting the word. Yes, let's be honest. Let's talk about reality, as you put it. The reality is that you've made my struggle with infertility about you, about your needs, your legacy, your disappointment. You've weaponized my pain against me every chance you've gotten. Rachel, David started, finally finding his voice. But I held up my hand. No, she wanted to speak freely. She wanted honesty. She's going to get it. I turned back to Elaine. You sit there, in your perfect house, with your perfect family, and you judge me for something beyond my control. You've made me feel like less of a woman, less of a wife, less of a human being because my body doesn't work the way you think it should. Elaine's mouth opened, but I wasn't done. You've spent 3 years chipping away at my marriage, planting seeds of doubt in David's mind, making him question our future. You've turned every family gathering into a minefield, every conversation into an opportunity to remind me of what I can't provide. And you've done it all while maintaining this facade of the concerned mother-in-law. My voice was rising now, years of suppressed anger finally finding release. You want to talk about God's plan? Maybe God's plan was to teach you compassion, empathy, basic human decency, but you failed that test spectacularly. Elaine's face had gone from red to white. Her wine glass trembled in her hand. How dare you speak to me like that in my own home? You're right about one thing, though, I continued, cutting her off. False hope is cruel. So let me remove any false hope you might have. You will never break me. You will never make me small enough to fit into whatever box you've designed for failed women. And you will never, ever make me believe that I'm not meant to be a mother. The silence that followed my words was absolute. Elaine stood slowly, her face cycling through emotions, shock, anger, indignation. She drew herself up to her full height, ready to deliver what I'm sure would have been a scathing response. But I wasn't done. Not even close. You know what, Elaine, I said, reaching for my clutch beside my plate. You're absolutely right about one thing. We should acknowledge reality. My fingers found the zipper of the inner pocket. The ultrasound photos were smooth against my fingertips, still warm from being close to my body all evening. I pulled them out slowly, deliberately, keeping them face down for a moment. The reality is, I continued, my voice steady and clear, that you've been wrong about me from the very beginning, wrong about my worth, wrong about my purpose, and especially, I paused, savoring the moment, wrong about my ability to be a mother. I placed the first ultrasound photo face up on the table, directly in front of my plate where everyone could see it. The black and white image was grainy but unmistakable, the distinctive curved shape of a uterus, and inside it, a tiny bean-shaped form with a flickering spot that the technician had labeled heart. The room seemed to inhale collectively. Jennifer gasped. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Tom dropped his fork entirely. Robert's bourbon glass stopped halfway to his lips. But I kept my eyes on Elaine, watching as her face transformed from righteous indignation to complete incomprehension. What? She started, her voice barely a whisper. I placed the second photo down, this one showing measurements. 6 weeks? 5 days? I said conversationally. Due August 15th. Strong heartbeat at 142 beats per minute. David made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. Rachel, we're... I placed the third photo down, then the fourth. Each one another nail in the coffin of Elaine's narrative. The photos lay there like evidence at a trial, proof of her complete and utter wrongness. You'll never be a mother, I quoted, looking directly at Elaine. That's what you said, isn't it? Not 5 minutes ago? Actually, you've been saying it for 3 years in 100 different ways. Every family dinner, every phone call, every concerned conversation about my situation. Elaine sank into her chair, her face the color of ash. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. I found out 3 days ago, I continued, my voice gaining strength. I've been carrying this baby while you served your turkey and made your toasts about inadequacy and God's plan. My child's heart has been beating inside me while you suggested I should give up, that David should leave me, that I should accept my barrenness. Rachel, David said, tears streaming down his face. Why didn't you tell me? How did you? I finally looked at my husband, really looked at him. I did another round of IVF, alone, paid for it myself, drove myself to every appointment, gave myself every injection, went through the retrieval and transfer without you holding my hand, because you gave up on us. David, you gave up on me. The pain in his eyes was sharp and immediate. Good. He needed to feel this. I was going to tell you Christmas morning, I said. I had it all planned. Baby booties, the ultrasound photos, the whole surprise. We were going to call our families together, share the joy. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. But then I sat in that parking garage after the ultrasound, holding these photos, and I realized something. This moment, this reveal, it wasn't going to be about our miracle. It was going to be about Elaine being right all along, about how her prayers were answered, about how I finally did my job as a woman. Margaret was crying now, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Jennifer had pushed back from the table, her hand protectively over her own belly. Tom looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. So I decided to wait, I continued, to let you have your moment, Elaine, to let you stand there and make your pronouncements about my empty womb and my inadequate body and my failure as a wife, to let you reveal exactly who you are to everyone in this room. I stood up, gathering the ultrasound photos carefully, treating them like the treasures they were. You want to talk about God's plan. Here's what I think God's plan was: to show everyone at this table that cruelty dressed up in concern is still cruelty, that a grandmother who would torture her daughter-in-law over something beyond her control doesn't deserve the title. Elaine finally found her voice. Rachel, I didn't know. If I had known you were pregnant, you would have what? I interrupted. Been kind, shown compassion, treated me like a human being worthy of respect. The fact that there's a baby growing inside me doesn't suddenly make me worthy of basic decency. I was worthy of that all along. I tucked the photos back into my clutch, handling them with the reverence they deserved. But don't worry, Elaine, your prayers have been answered. David will be a father. The precious Monroe genetic legacy will continue. I paused at the head of the table, looking at each family member in turn. Margaret looked stricken, Tom ashamed, Robert disappointed in a way that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd witnessed his wife's cruelty. Jennifer gave me the smallest nod of support. And David looked shattered, like his world had imploded, which I suppose it had. Finally. I turned back to Elaine, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. There's just one thing you should know, I said, my voice soft but carrying clearly through the silent room. This child growing inside me, this miracle you've been praying for, they will never, ever call you grandmother. The words hit her like a physical blow. She actually recoiled, her hand going to her chest. You can't do that, she whispered. You can't keep my grandchild from me. Watch me, I said simply. You've spent 3 years telling me what I can't do. Now it's my turn. You can't do that, Elaine repeated, her voice rising now, the shock giving way to anger. That's my son's child. I have rights. Rights. I laughed, but it was sharp, bitter. Let's talk about rights. Elaine, where were my rights when you publicly humiliated me at every family gathering? Where were my rights when you told your book club that David married beneath him? Oh yes, Jennifer told me about that. Where were my rights when you suggested to David, behind my back, that he should consider other options if I couldn't produce children? David's head snapped toward his mother. You said what? Elaine's mouth opened, but I wasn't giving her the chance to spin this. 2 months ago, I said, looking at David now. She called you at work, suggested that maybe you should consider divorce before you got any older, that you deserved a woman who could give you children, that there were lovely young women at her church who would be perfect for you. Ring any bells. The color drained from David's face. Mom, tell me you didn't. I was concerned for your happiness. Elaine burst out, her carefully constructed facade finally cracking completely. 3 years. David. 3 years of watching you suffer, watching your marriage become about nothing but failure and disappointment. Our marriage became about that because of you. I shot back. Every doubt David had, you amplified. Every moment of weakness, you exploited. You turned our struggle into your personal crusade to get rid of me. Tom stood up abruptly. Jesus Christ, Mom. Is this true? Language. Thomas, Elaine said automatically, but her voice was weak. No, don't you dare, Margaret said, finding her voice finally. Don't you dare try to maintain some moral high ground here. I've watched you chip away at Rachel for years, and I said nothing because I'm a coward, because it wasn't directed at me. But this trying to break up their marriage. I've watched it too, Robert said quietly, and everyone turned to look at him. He so rarely spoke during family conflicts that his voice carried enormous weight. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that it was between you women, But I've seen the cruelty. Elaine, the little comments, the exclusions, the way you've made Rachel feel like an outsider in this family. Robert, Elaine gasped, betrayed by the one person she'd always counted on to stay silent. She's pregnant, Elaine. Robert continued, his voice heavy with disappointment. She's pregnant, and instead of joy, instead of celebration, we're sitting here in the wreckage of your vindictiveness. You've turned what should be the happiest announcement of our son's life into this. Jennifer, who had been silent through most of this, suddenly spoke up. You know what the worst part is? Rachel went through IVF alone. Do you have any idea how horrific that is? The physical pain, the emotional toll, the fear. She did that by herself because she couldn't trust any of us. Because we all let Elaine create an environment where Rachel felt completely unsupported. She looked at David with barely concealed disgust. Especially you. Your wife was going through hell, and you were what? Working late, avoiding conflict, letting your mother poison your marriage while you played ostrich. David was crying openly now, ugly sobs that shook his shoulders. Rachel, please. I didn't know she said those things. I didn't know you were going through treatment. I would have been there. Would you? I asked, genuinely curious. Would you have stood up to her? Would you have defended me, or would you have done what you've always done, stayed silent, avoided confrontation? Let me fight alone. That's not fair, he choked out. Fair. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to my photos. You want to see fair? Look. I showed him a picture I'd taken of myself 3 weeks ago, my stomach covered in bruises from the injections, purple and green and yellow marks covering my abdomen like a sick rainbow. I did this to myself every morning at 5:45 while you slept. 23 injections over 2 weeks, alone in our bathroom, biting on a towel so I wouldn't wake you with my crying. Margaret gasped. Tom turned away. Even Elaine flinched. And this. I scrolled to another photo, me in the hospital gown before egg retrieval, taking a selfie because I had no one else to document this moment. November 28th. You thought I was at a conference in Columbus. I was having surgery. They put a needle through my vaginal wall to extract eggs from my ovaries. I drove myself home afterward, high on pain medication because I had no one else. Stop, David begged. Please, Rachel, stop. Why? Because it's uncomfortable, because it's ruining the perfect Monroe family Christmas. I looked around the room. This is what you all contributed to. Your silence, your complicity, your willingness to let Elaine's cruelty go unchecked. This is the result. I turned back to Elaine, who looked smaller now, shrunken in her chair like a deflated balloon. But here's what you don't understand. What you've never understood. Every cruel word, every humiliation, every attempt to break me, it just made me stronger. It made me more determined. You thought you were wearing me down, but you were actually forging me into someone who could endure anything, including doing IVF alone, including carrying this secret, including standing here now, burning every bridge with your family if necessary to protect my child from your poison. Our child, David said weakly. Our child, Rachel. Please. I looked at him, really studied him. The man I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago at a conference in Chicago. The man who'd proposed to me on the shore of Lake Erie, promising to stand by me through anything. The man who'd let his mother psychologically torture me for 3 years while he built office complexes and avoided uncomfortable conversations. I don't know if it's ours anymore. David, I said quietly, you abdicated that right when you abandoned me, when you let her win, over and over again, when you suggested we just accept being childless because it was easier than fighting for us. The room fell silent again, but it was different this time. This wasn't the shocked silence of revelation or the uncomfortable silence of conflict. This was the silence of endings, of things that couldn't be taken back, of families fractured beyond repair. 3 years, I said, my voice carrying through the devastated room. For 3 years, I've sat at this table, in this exact chair, enduring your judgment, Elaine. Every Christmas, every Easter, every 4th of July, every family birthday. Do you want to know what that's been like? Really, no, I didn't wait for an answer. Thanksgiving 2 years ago, you made a point of having Margaret's children draw pictures of what they were thankful for. You hung them on the refrigerator, right where I'd see them. One of them drew their family, including future siblings. You said, and I quote, "Children are so intuitive about family growth. Unlike some adults who can't accept reality." You said it while looking directly at me. Margaret's face crumpled. Mom, I didn't know last Easter, I continued, steamrolling over her. You seated me at the kids' table, said there wasn't enough room with all the real adults. I was 35 years old, sitting with 6-year-olds, while David sat at the main table because, as you put it, we need at least one representative from each family unit. The implication being that I, alone, wasn't a family unit. Tom ran his hands through his hair. Jesus, Mom! David's birthday this year. I kept going, each memory a bullet. You gave him a photo album. Remember that filled with pictures of him as a child, with a section at the back labeled Future Memories that was empty. You said it was waiting to be filled with the next generation. You made him flip through those empty pages in front of everyone. David looked sick. I threw that album away, he said quietly. I didn't tell you, but I threw it in the dumpster behind my office. But you didn't say anything to her, I pointed out. You never once told her to stop. 4th of July, I continued, turning back to Elaine. You introduced me to your new neighbors as David's first wife. When I corrected you, you laughed and said, well, we'll see how long that lasts without children. You were drunk, but drunk words are sober thoughts, aren't they? Robert stood up abruptly, walking to the window, unable to look at his wife. Mother's Day this year was special, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You had everyone at brunch except me. When David asked why I wasn't invited, you said it was for mothers only, and it would be insensitive to include me. David went without me, sent me a text saying the food was good. Rachel. David started. I'm not done. I cut him off. Your mother's book club meeting in September. I ran into Patricia Hendricks at Whole Foods. She couldn't look me in the eye. Finally admitted that your mother had asked the group to pray for David to find a more suitable partner who could give him the family he deserves. 12 women. Elaine. You had 12 women praying for my marriage to end. Elaine's hands were shaking now, her perfect manicure clicking against the table as she trembled. But my favorite, I said, leaning forward. My absolute favorite was 2 weeks ago. You called David while I was in the shower. Didn't know I could hear through the bathroom door. You told him about a fertility specialist in Boston who had an egg donor program. Young, healthy women. You'd already researched it, had brochures sent to your house. You suggested David could use a donor and a surrogate, have his biological child without my defective involvement. The room erupted. Margaret actually screamed, "What?" Tom kicked his chair. Jennifer covered her face with her hands. Robert turned from the window, his face purple with rage. You didn't, he said to his wife. Tell me you didn't suggest our son replace his wife with a catalog. Elaine's facade finally, completely shattered. I was trying to help. All I've ever done is try to help. Is it so wrong to want grandchildren? To want my son to be happy? Your son's happiness. I laughed, but it was hollow. This was never about David's happiness. This was about your image, your legacy, your need to control everything and everyone around you. You couldn't stand that I didn't fit into your perfect family portrait, that I was the one variable you couldn't manipulate. I stood up straighter, feeling the power of truth coursing through me. But here's what you never understood, Elaine. Every time you tried to diminish me, you revealed yourself. Every cruel comment exposed your character. Every attempt to exclude me showed your true nature. and everyone here saw it, even if they were too cowardly to say anything. I looked around at the table. You all saw it. Every single one of you watched this woman torture me for 3 years, and you did nothing. You chose comfort over conscience, peace over principle. Well, congratulations. You kept the peace, and this is what it bought you, a family built on cruelty and silence. That's enough, Elaine said, trying to regain control. You've made your point. You're pregnant. We're all happy for you. Now sit down and... Happy. I interrupted. You think you get to be happy about this. You think you get to suddenly play the excited grandmother. No. You forfeited that right every time you made me feel worthless. Every time you suggested I was broken. Every time you tried to convince David to leave me. I pulled out my phone again, this time opening my voice recorder app. Would you like to hear the recording I made of your phone call to David about the egg donor? I started recording all your calls after the first wife comment. My lawyer found them very interesting. David's head snapped up. Lawyer. Oh, yes, I said calmly. I've been documenting everything for months. Every slight, every humiliation, every attempt at alienation. Michigan is a one-party consent state for recordings. I have dozens of voice memos, text screenshots, emails you sent to David suggesting alternatives to our marriage. My lawyer says it's textbook emotional abuse and alienation of affection. More than enough for a restraining order if necessary. Elaine went white. You're threatening me. I'm protecting my child, I said simply. From you. From your poison. From the toxic environment you create wherever you go. This baby will grow up knowing they are loved, wanted, cherished. Everything you tried to convince me I didn't deserve. I walked to the dining room entrance, then turned back for one final moment. The Christmas tree lights twinkled behind the devastated family tableau. Elaine slumped in her chair like a dethroned queen. David with his head in his hands. The others frozen in various states of shock and shame. You know what the cruelest irony is, I said, my hand resting protectively over my stomach where my baby grew. If you had just been kind, Elaine, if you had just shown me an ounce of compassion, of humanity, of basic decency, you'd be planning baby showers right now. You'd be knitting blankets and buying cribs and fighting with my mother over who gets to babysit first. This could have been your greatest joy. Instead, it's your greatest loss. I pulled my coat from the closet, taking my time, letting the weight of my words settle over the room like snow. Rachel. Wait, David said, finally standing, finally finding his spine. Too little, too late. Please, we need to talk about this, about the baby, about us, about everything. I looked at him. This man I'd once loved so desperately I'd endured 3 years of hell for the chance to give him a child. If you want to talk, you can contact my lawyer. I'll be staying at the Marriott tonight. My bags are already in my car. I packed them this morning, knowing this would end exactly like this. You planned this, Elaine whispered, a last desperate attempt to make me the villain. You deliberately destroyed our family Christmas? No, Elaine, I said, buttoning my coat with steady fingers. You destroyed this family long ago. I just finally held up a mirror to show everyone what you'd done. Margaret stood suddenly. Rachel, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I should have defended you. I softened slightly, looking at my sister-in-law. I know you are, Margaret, but sorry doesn't undo 3 years of silence. What about the baby? Tom asked quietly. Will we ever get to meet them? That depends, I said, on whether this family can acknowledge what happened here, whether you can admit that standing by while someone is abused makes you complicit, whether David can choose his wife and child over his mother's approval, and whether Elaine can accept that she needs serious help, therapy, counseling, something to address this pathological need for control. I looked directly at Elaine for the last time. You will never be alone with my child. You will never whisper poison in their ear about their mother. You will never make them feel less than perfect exactly as they are. If, And it's a big if you ever meet this baby. It will be under my terms, with my supervision, after you've shown genuine change, not performed remorse, real change. You can't keep a grandchild from their grandmother, Elaine said weakly, desperately. A grandmother is someone who loves unconditionally, I replied, who protects and nurtures, who builds up instead of tears down. You're not a grandmother, Elaine. You're just a woman who happened to give birth to my child's father. Biology doesn't make you family. Love does. And you've shown you're incapable of that. David made one last attempt. Rachel, please, don't leave. Not tonight. Not like this. Think about the baby. I am thinking about the baby, I said, my hand on the door handle. For the first time in 3 years, I'm thinking clearly. This child deserves better than a father who won't protect them, a grandmother who will manipulate them, and a family who will stand by while they're hurt. I opened the door to the Michigan winter night. Snow was falling heavily now, blanketing the perfect suburban street in white. It looked clean, fresh, like a new beginning. If you want to be part of this child's life, David, you know what you have to do. Choose. Your mother or your family. Her approval or our future. You can't have both anymore. I stepped out into the snow and then turned back one final time. The dining room was visible through the doorway, the abandoned Christmas dinner, the toppled wine glasses, the family frozen in the ruins of Elaine's kingdom. Merry Christmas, I said, not sarcastically, but with genuine finality. May it bring you all the gifts you deserve. I walked to my car without looking back. The snow crunched under my boots, each step taking me further from 3 years of pain and closer to an unknown but promising future. As I drove away, I saw David burst out of the front door in my rearview mirror, running after my car in his dress shoes, slipping on the icy driveway, calling my name into the winter night. But I didn't stop. I'd stopped too many times before, stopped defending myself, stopped expecting respect, stopped believing I deserved better. Not anymore. My phone started buzzing immediately. Texts from David, from Margaret, even from Tom. I turned it off and drove through the quiet Christmas Eve streets toward the hotel, toward freedom, toward a future where my child would never question their worth. As I pulled into the Marriott parking lot, I felt the baby flutter for the first time, just the faintest sensation, like butterfly wings or bubbles popping. It was too early, medically speaking, to feel movement at barely 7 weeks, but I knew what it was. It was my child saying, "Well done, Mom. We're going to be just fine." I sat in my car for a moment, snow accumulating on the windshield, and laughed. Real laughter. Not bitter or hollow, but genuine joy. Elaine Monroe thought she could break me. She thought she could convince me I'd never be a mother. But here I was, already the fiercest mother my child could ask for, protecting them before they were even born. She was wrong about everything, but especially about that. I was born to be a mother, and I'd just proven it by walking away from anyone who would dare make my child feel the way Elaine had made me feel. That's what mothers do. They protect. They sacrifice. They choose their children above all else. Even if it means spending Christmas alone in a hotel room, knowing that tomorrow will be better because it will be free of people who mistake cruelty for love and silence for peace. My baby and I would build our own family, one filled with actual love, genuine support, and unshakable loyalty. And if David wanted to be part of it, he knew exactly what he had to do. But I wasn't holding my breath. I'd learned to breathe on my own. The snow kept falling, covering everything in pristine white, and I walked into that hotel knowing I'd already given my child the greatest Christmas gift of all, a mother who would never, ever let anyone make them feel unworthy of love. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with each other. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up to toxic family members? How did you find the courage? Let's discuss in the comments.